Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at one of my very favorite Chinese domestic pistol designs. This is a scaled up, like a pistol carbine version of the FN model of 1900, and these were manufactured at the Shanghai Arsenal in China between 1916 and 1921. Now, if you're interested in Chinese pistols from this period, you should definitely check out the Kickstarter I currently have running for my upcoming book on the subject. We cover these and a whole smorgasbord more. But to continue on this story, what we have here, the FN 1900 was a particularly popular pistol in China, one of the two most popular pistol designs, that and the broom-handle Mauser. And the Shanghai Arsenal, which, by the way, was set up basically along Western industrial lines under a relatively stable national government before the warlord era really descended into total chaos, this arsenal produced standard, actual, exact copies of the FN 1900 and this sort of large-scale pistol carbine version. So let me show you this up close. For reference sake, here is our large pistol carbine type FN 1900. Here is a copy of a totally standard FN pattern 1900 pistol. This was actually made by the Jinling Arsenal. Shanghai Arsenal did make these standard copies as well as the large versions, but had this one handy to show you. So you can see the similarities here. These both operate in exactly the same way. The FN 1900 was really the first practical civilian carry pistol, semi-auto carry pistol, and it's got some distinctive features, largely like the barrel being below the tube up here, which contains the recoil spring, and you can see we have the same system right here on our large version. So what the Shanghai Arsenal did with this design was basically scale it up to sort of mimic the C96 Mauser. So we have a tangent sight here on the back, and this is fully functional, unlike a lot of domestic Chinese pistols. It goes out to 500 meters. These were actually manufactured on a true Western-style production line with interchangeable parts. I don't know exactly how strictly interchangeable parts of different examples of these pistols are, but they are certainly all the same part made on the same tooling, and they may require a bit of hand fitting to try and interchange, but they are fundamentally all the exact same design. The sight picture here is actually reasonable. So we've got a front blade and then a V-notch rear sight. It's a little hard to get the full sight picture with focus issues with the camera here, but that's what it looks like. The back of the grip was actually given more material, like there's an extra boss here that then has a slot cut in it for a shoulder stock, which is something that the Chinese really liked with the C96 Mauser. Unfortunately, I have yet to find any example of a shoulder stock for these pistols, but I expect it would be very much like the C96, where it functioned as both holster and shoulder stock. The magazine catch here is exactly the same as on the FN 1900, so you actually push it towards the magazine, and then you can pull the magazine out. This one's a little tight. It is a 10-round single-stack magazine, and the pistols are chambered for 32 ACP, just like the standard FN 1900. Now, the grips have some Chinese characters molded into them, and this side actually identifies the year of manufacture. This says made for the Republic of China in the 10th year. That character right there is the numeral 10. 10th year is based on a calendar starting in 1911 at the Chinese Revolution, so this would be a 1921 production, which is at the very end of the known production time frame. That said, this has a serial number of 1733. We have identified, we've observed examples up to serial number 4319. It is unclear as to whether the Shanghai production of these large versions and the small versions were made in the same serial number range or if they were separate. So I can't be entirely sure if there were 4,300 of these large pistols made or just 4,300 FN 1900 pattern guns in general. Anyway, the grip on the other side, this is the left side grip, basically just says Shanghai Arsenal. We have a manual safety here, exactly the same in function to a regular FN 1900. Now to disassemble the gun, I just have to pull these two screws out, and then the breech block will come out and the slide will come off. Mechanically, this is a John Browning designed pistol. There's a tremendous amount of very cool history behind the FN 1900 that we will get into in a standalone video on the original Belgian production guns. So with those two screws out, I can now separate the slide from the breech block and frame. So I'm actually just going to pull the slide off the front of the gun. And there we have this guy. Now the breech block is held onto the frame by this little sort of C-clamp there that clamps around the recoil spring guide. So if I pull the spring out, there we go, we can lift that free. And then the breech block assembly comes out the back of the pistol. Now, with the exception of the recoil spring being longer because the barrel is longer and having this tangent rear sight instead of a simple rear notch sight, this is essentially identical to John Browning's FN 1900 design. So the main spring here acts as the striker spring, as you can see right there. It is captive, and that's in Chinese production examples and the original Browning design. It's really a very clever little pistol. So the frame of the gun here has basically nothing to it except the trigger mechanism. You pull the trigger, the sear drops, and that releases the striker to go forward. Note that we have the serial number repeated here on the inside of the frame as well as on the outside. And we have a 5.5-inch barrel, up from the approximately 4-inch barrel of the standard size FN 1900. Now, I've mentioned that these pistols were made at a legitimate arsenal on a real Western-style production line, and they're high quality and have more or less interchangeable parts. However, one of the things that fascinates me about Chinese domestic handgun design is how they had this disparity of really good quality stuff and also really pretty poor quality. And it is fascinating that we also have an example here of a domestic Chinese, essentially a Chinese knockoff of a Chinese design. So obviously, you can tell this is the same basic style of pistol, but it's clearly not Arsenal made. If we take a look at the left side, it has this just string of complete gibberish markings, which we've kind of come to expect on stereotypical artisanal production Chinese pistols. And that extends to the grips as well, where, and this is either, I suppose, perhaps carved into a single example or actually molded into grips. Some, backwards lettering. There's a picture of a pistol, but it's not a picture of this pistol. We have this very odd dog sort of creature here on the right grip and some other separate gibberish markings. There is a serial number on this gun, 2324, but it almost certainly is not indicative of actual serial production of this pattern, because this isn't quite the same in any area as a real Shanghai 1900 pistol carbine. For example, if we look at the bottom of the frame, you can see that the real gun here has a rather narrower frame to it, and it has a nice rounded profile at the front strap of the grip, where the copy is wider, probably because it was, well, it's easier to use more material than less, and it's much more squared off at the front. The magazine is of a different design. You can see the magazine floor plate is held on here by a pair of relatively crude bent over lips. If we look at details like the construction of the trigger guard, you can see that on the real gun, we have the frame solid up here, and then it drops down to the trigger guard, where you've got a little bit of a flat, where this is really a rather different pattern. The frame itself up here drops straight down into trigger guard. The side panel here extends all the way down, where it doesn't on the real version. One of the typical characteristics of artisanal Chinese pistols is the lack of manufacture of functional sights. On the real gun here, you can see this pretty typical for professional firearms manufacturing, where the rear sight has a larger cutout in the front to help gather light and then a V-notch behind, where on the copy, we just have a simple notch cut through the rear sight. And that notch is actually too small to even be recognizable as a sight notch on the back, where the real gun has a nice, reasonably deep V. Just in general, we have a much lower standard of manufacturing on the copy than we do on the Arsenal production gun, which really shouldn't be any surprise, but I think it's really cool, like I said, to have a Chinese copy of a Chinese copy. As I said at the beginning, this is one of my very favorite designs. So, in fact, so much so that, well, these are both in the upcoming book, by the way, which I have a link to the ongoing Kickstarter down in the description text. If you're interested in these, definitely check out the book. There's I think, a fantastic Kickstarter exclusive cover design that I bet you'll really get a kick out of. At any rate, in the process of writing the book, I acquired one of these pistols for myself, and tomorrow I am actually going to go ahead and run that through one of our backup gun matches and see how it does, because what could go wrong, right? Well, you know, these are actual factory-made pistols made to a very high standard of quality and hopefully won't blow up in my face, but I guess we'll find out. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.